Okay. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for a Tuesday, September the 21st, 2021. So there was an election in my country of Canada yesterday, and it's as if nothing changed. I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for 2021 Canadian federal election. I was talking to Peter Brimlow a few days ago, and he pointed out that the People's Party of Canada is not listed on the Wikipedia page. I guess the editors, the moderators of Wikipedia, they do not like Maxime Bernier and his PPC, so they decided to pretend that he doesn't exist, which is really kind of remarkable, but in a way, when we're talking about Canada, it's not that remarkable at all. Here's a story by Rachel Aiello from CTV News. Trudeau vows to get back to work as Liberals win election but fall short of a majority. Well, you know, Trudeau had a minority government for 2 years. There was no need to call the election. He thought that he would win a majority, which he did not. He ended up with three more seats from 155 seats to 158. Majority is 170. And his percentage of the vote went down to 32.3%. For the second election in a row, the Conservatives won more votes than the Liberals, but this did not translate into seats. And so, yes, you are setting us back with a clear mandate to get us through this pandemic into brighter days ahead, Trudeau said, after thrusting the country into the COVID-19 campaign in hopes of a third term under majority rule. Politicians like to talk about mandates. They do, well, in my country, they do whatever the hell they want, and they claim they have a mandate for it. I can't imagine what kind of a mandate Trudeau would have after this election. I hear you when you say you just want to get back to the things we love, not to worry about this pandemic or about an election, that you just want to know that your members of parliament of all stripes will have your back through this crisis and beyond, Trudeau said. The moment we face demands real important change, and you have given this parliament and this government clear direction. Again, it's just all made up, all completely made up. Let's look at the news from CBC. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney shuffles health minister out of portfolio. That would be Tyler Shandro, who for some reason decided to decrease the number of intensive care beds in the province of Alberta, leading to a situation where Alberta asked Ottawa for immediate help to airlift COVID patients out of the province. The Conservative, ever since Stephen Harper lost in 2015, we've been told, the elitists told us, that the Conservative Party needs to move to the center. And you couldn't move any further to the center than Erin O'Toole did, but it didn't help him. Yes, he's not Stephen Harper. No question. No, he's not at all like Stephen Harper. He's not a meanie like Stephen Harper. And he ended up, his party ended up the same. 119 seats last time, 119 seats this time. Why do the Liberals keep winning? It's pretty simple, really. Because they keep importing voters from foreign countries. That's how they keep winning. Justin Trudeau is not a well-liked man in my country. Well, call him a man. He's an overgrown child. Trustafarian, sitting in the big boy seat. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole said Tuesday he's disappointed with his party's performance in an election that returned his Liberal opponents to power with a large plurality of seats in the House of Commons. Speaking to reporters at a hotel ballroom in Ottawa, O'Toole repeatedly evaded questions about what the party's poor showing could mean for his future as leader. While O'Toole signaled in his concession speech last night that he'd like to stay on to fight another election, he pivoted to talking points about launching review of the campaign's missteps when asked today about his place at the top. O'Toole was asked if he's worried about internal pressure to oust him now. "I'm the leader of the party that founded this great country, and I'm proud of that," he replied. Well, I guess he would be referring to Sir Johnny MacDonald, who was replaced on the $10 bill by a black hairdresser from Nova Scotia, and whose statues have been overturned all across Canada. Not that Aaron O'Toole really cares about that sort of thing. Pressed to explain why he feels he deserves another shot, O'Toole said he's in the process of trying to make sure we are reaching out to more and more Canadians. Under the party's constitution, there is an automatic leadership review at the first National Conservative Convention following a federal general election when the party does not form the government and the leader has not indicated prior to the commencement of the National Convention an irrevocable intention to resign. Again, move to the center. Yes. Carbon tax. Favors a carbon tax. He doesn't call it a carbon tax. He calls it something else. Yes, he is pro-choice, very much loves abortion, and he's everything. Aaron O'Toole is everything that the media said would be a successful conservative leader, and yet somehow he did not win. He did not even come close, actually. I have to say that one of the amusing things about this election was, once again, the media told us that Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democratic Party, he was going to make a big breakthrough in this election. No, he didn't. Number of seats from 24 to 25, which is well down from what Thomas Mulcair did as NDP leader. It's a really crummy performance, but the media, the elite, has invested so much in this man who looks like a cartoon villain that I think that he can probably keep that job forever. Annamie Paul, the leader of the Green Party, who got an enormous amount of media attention, despite the fact that her party is on the fringe, she lost her seat in Toronto Centre. She didn't win. She got 8% of the vote. And let's see, 2 seats the party won, down 4.3% in the popular vote. But since she is a black woman, I guess, I don't know, maybe she'll stick around. It's a weird decision, the Green Party choosing her. She is a convert to Judaism. And of course, the Green Party has an obsessive interest in Israel, hostile interest, that is. And how did she get elected? Well, because they don't do conventions anymore, as I was saying on Friday. You used to get a few thousand people in a room, and you keep making the vote until someone got a majority of the votes, but that's not to save money. The parties don't do that anymore. So you end up with leaders like Annamie Paul, who really has little to no support in the Green Party. And there have been repeated attempts to oust her from the leadership pretty much ever since she won. Let's take a look at the chat. Hello to Gamion, Kontiki Roulette, our valiant moderator, Chad Chadson. Thank you for your service. Dan Anran, Matt Beck. Metal Mike says, I guess O'Toole's pivot to the left work, eh? Yeah. Hello to Quachalango, Dan Allison, William Hicks. Canadian politics, try to contain your excitement, everyone, says Steve. Matt Forney says, O'Toole lived up to his name, made a handful of gains in leftish Atlantic Canada, and managed to lose even more in the West due to the PPC. Quachalango says, anyone else find those 2 hours of a canceled KMG Monday show fairly productive? Matt Forney says, I watched the English language debate, and O'Toole is just as visually and ideologically repulsive as Trudeau. Stupid am I, pleasing you, grin on his face, soft countenance, no masculinity whatsoever. And I'll mention again that on National Pink Shirt Day, because that's a thing in Canada, he dressed his 9-year-old son in a pink shirt for a video. Absolutely shameless. Campbell 69 says we need a handsome, skinny, young, far-right conservative leader. Hello to Matt Beck, John Est, and Rushton Shackelford, who says all the Conservative Party has to do is to go further to the left to the win. Yeah. It doesn't seem to have occurred to our elite that maybe Canadians would be interested in an alternative because they're not getting one. Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Gerson, who's a Canadian political reporter, been around for a while. She has a Substack, and she seems to be pretty pissed off with Canadian politics. Her piece on the election is called "I Have Concerns." This was an election about nothing. It's a tribute to vanity and an excuse for the callow pursuit of a power with no aim. She writes, throughout this election campaign, I've written weekly rounds up on Fridays at the line. I'm not on the campaign trail, mind. And what I've tried to offer here are not daily gaffes or horse race analysis, but rather a sense of the overall themes of the election. This Friday's blast will be the final summation, and I suppose it must be the grandest of them all. It ought to be an examination of the key themes, narratives, and the most coveted of all items, an articulate summation of the ballot box question. The problem that will be flitting around my limbic system, unquestioned, unspoken at the moment, disposable pencil meets tiny circle. This is quite the task. I'll start with lunch. More specifically, I'll start with a lunch I had a few weeks ago at one of those perfect hipster sandwich shops in downtown Calgary that calls mayonnaise aioli and displays a haunch of hot porchetta in the window. If you live here, you know the place. I overheard the owner talking about meat prices. This summer's drought has driven up the cost of feed, and ranchers are slaughtering a third, maybe half of their herds before winter. Meat prices are going to be a horror come next year. Things are going to be harder from here on out, I said, slamming back that porchetta and salsa verde. Yep, he agreed. It's been a good 50-year run, but it's the end of the golden age. That phrase, golden age. This is something I've been talking about with my friends and family and fellow wonks for some time, but it was the first time I had heard the fact of our situation acknowledged in the wild. How is it that the guy who makes great sandwiches understands something that our political classes do not? If the collapse of Afghanistan, the anniversary of 9/11, and the rise of China has not made this all abundantly clear by now, we are in the middle of some kind of realignment of the world order, as lately evidenced by a major defense pact between America, the UK, and Australia, a pact we are conspicuously not present for. Afghanistan and COVID have revealed profound limitations at both the national and provincial level, including a federal bureaucracy so sclerotic that it is failing to perform some of its most basic duties, whether these might include evacuating former staffers now in danger abroad, to standard military procurement, to running a payroll system. Meanwhile, I possess no certainty about what our post-pandemic recovery is going to look like, presuming there is even a post-pandemic to look forward to. We need to prepare some really hard and fast ramifications of climate change. I don't think so. I'm not talking my carbon tax is better than your incomprehensible carbon savings account nonsense. I mean the real economic consequences of energy transition, disaster planning, food supply, refugee resettlement, and national security. In calling this election at this moment, Trudeau stumbled into a moment of unique historical significance. And what the fuck have we spent the last 6 weeks fapping about on? Two-tier healthcare? A phrase I had not heard in a decade prior to this election. Something, something abortions, something, something guns. When to raise flags all the way back up the mast. A $10 a day daycare scheme that I have no faith will culminate in a high-quality, universally accessible system. We're moving forward or securing our future. What we're moving forward to and what we're securing our future from is unclear to me. This isn't an election. It's a dozen brilliant little talking point gems sparkling with the patina of a dozen focus groups and intended to chip away a few hundred accessible votes in key swing ridings. What a damnable waste of everybody's time. This was an election about nothing. It's a tribute to vanity and an excuse for the callow pursuit of a power with no aim. Now, I'll just say this. When people complain about unnecessary elections, if you really feel that strongly about it, you can vote against the man who called the unnecessary election, but that doesn't seem to have happened. There's a delicious rumor floating around Ottawa that the reason that Trudeau called the election is that his wife is intending to divorce him. And so he decided to go sooner rather than later with the election. But Jen Gerson continues, Justin Trudeau is the least well-liked of any of the federal party leaders, and that is no mystery. His most dedicated supporters aren't the young. He's remained mostly durably popular among the boomer generation, who imagine him to be the vision of Canada they're leaving behind, one that is prosperous, optimistic, and progressive. Trudeau has figured out with mathematical precision exactly what this cohort want reflected in a prime minister: youth, vigor, and virtue. And she links to a Liberal Party ad called Relentless and comments, this Liberal ad above is so painfully telling to me, right down in the gratuitous black and white clips of assembly lines and soldiers from the Second World War. This is a country with big ideas, Trudeau narrates. Is it? We build stronger, think bigger, work smart, and push ourselves harder than any other place on earth. Do we? We speak our minds and we listen to each other. Is that so? While we may not agree on everything, we find a way to work things out. Have we? We pull together to make things better and leave no one behind. Are all these statements true, or are they merely the sorts of things we like to believe about ourselves? Is this advertisement just flattery from a politician trying to weasel a vote out of a warm, fuzzy feeling? Right down to the patronym, Trudeau's appeal is a nostalgia for a preeminence of a plucky, punch-above-its-weight nation that is long gone or fading. Hence the never-fulfilled promise to bring us back from the abyss of history. Therein lies much of Trudeau's undeniable success as a politician, but he has so perfected his role that he risks becoming the nation's darkly tinted mirror. If we actually can't stand this guy, it's because in him we see everything we so rightfully despise about ourselves. That our youth is fading, our vigor lives mostly in collective memory, and our virtue is performative and fundamentally unmatched by substance or sacrifice. Some columnists greater than I repeated the axiom, the Liberals are utterly convinced that they are the kinds of people who would never do the sorts of things that they routinely do. I don't need to waste time and space repeating the litany of cynical, broken promises, ethical lapses, and scandals here, do I? These are people who are self-assured enough to imagine they can regulate the internet and impose a bevy of new hate speech laws while running their own campaigns with manipulated media. Trudeau is among other leaders, including Erin O'Toole, odiously pounding to Quebec by demanding the Debates Commission apologize for allowing one of their moderators to ask about racism in Quebec and Bill 21. Jesus, I wouldn't put it past this government to declare Quebec-bashing hate speech at this point. The Liberals opened this campaign by weaponizing vaccine mandates, no doubt assured that this was a truly brilliant way to drive a wedge in the population between his party and the Conservatives. And when those very policy proposals ginned up a vocal cadre of protesters, including deranged hospital picketers, the Liberals saw an opportunity. Trudeau began to run against his own electorate, implying that these protesters, somehow enthralled to Erin O'Toole, were a danger to their own children. I'm no fan of the anti-vax set, but good Lord, how did this help anyone besides Trudeau? And at what cost to everyone else? How does turning vaccines into a key campaign wedge do anything except juice the most righteous delusions of those who are implacably opposed to them? Now, I don't totally begrudge the Liberals politicking. I can also forgive them the odd scandal and ethical lapse. It's the lack of self-awareness that gets me. This is less a political party than a personality cult, and one that attracts the subsection of society that's convinced it's smarter and better and more ethical and more competent than everyone else, despite all evidence to the contrary. That they and they alone know the best way forward, as the party slogan so helpfully puts it. One of the most crucial personality traits of any good leader is humility. The smartest people in the room can still be wrong. Problems are complicated, dissent is honorable, and people with different philosophies and perspectives also have something to bring to the table. Arrogance, that eternal liberal self-regard, are not indications of a sparkling intellect or fathomless competence. Arrogance is the shadow of mediocre talent. Gerson continues, here I suppose it will be expected that I will launch into a passionate appeal for Erin O'Toole, but I cannot bring myself to do that either. There's something not quite ready for prime time about this Conservative crew. O'Toole still feels like a cipher. I get the impression that there may indeed be an impressive human being somewhere in there, but he's not risking too many hints of this president's. O'Toole is so disciplined and over-prepared that he lacks nimbleness, an ability to respond to attacks and hard questions on the fly. He needs better media training, he needs more practice, and he needs to consolidate power within the party itself. How are the Conservatives seriously expecting to gain the trust of the electorate when they, as a party, are passing self-sabotaging resolutions against climate change, when they're launching the campaign with amateur hour jib-jab videos, and when some of their own candidates and MPs are backing the eye drug and masquerading as low-rent Alex Jones wannabes? Well, you see, again, this is the problem that any Conservative leader after Stephen Harper has. That the base of the party doesn't support Erin O'Toole. But Erin O'Toole needs the base, otherwise the Conservatives would run lower than the NDP. So there's a limit to how far he can go in smacking down people within his own party. Gerson writes, the COVID crisis now unfolding in Alberta raises real questions. To what extent is conservatism as an ideology hampering the province's ability to respond to a big government problem like a pandemic? Although I tend to credit personal failings over ideological ones, I honestly don't have an answer for that question. The civil libertarian crank who resides in the deepest reaches of my soul likes, in principle, the idea of a government that treats personal liberties and responsibilities as a central, unshakable pillar of governance. However, I also live in a province where lack of personal responsibility is going to wind up kicking grandma off the ventilator, and I'm not sure many Conservatives in this province are ready to lock eyes with the hard consequences of their freedom. I'm not buying this, okay? Old people die alone, and they die alone in Alberta, and they've been dying alone for a long, long time. There are few people in Canada who know anyone who has died from COVID. Gerson continues, defining conservatism throughout this next phase of history is going to be a generational challenge. It's going to suffer constantly from the impulse to chase the ephemera of populist rage as more Canadians are dislocated from the middle-class lives they imagined were assured to them. The anger is real and is justified by the haughty indifference of an increasingly remote ruling class that frankly doesn't seem to rule very well. Is O'Toole going to be the guy who will help define this era, or will he be led by it? He's only been leader for a year. His record is thinner, so it's harder to assess. He appealed to the far right of his party in order to win the leadership and then softened and moderated his political persona once the writ was drawn up. He seems perfectly willing to sell his own soul to Quebec for a narrow shot at a CPC bloc coalition. Well, that raises an interesting question. All of the party leaders suck up to Quebec. What if you had a party leader who said, I'm not sucking up to Quebec anymore? I'm not playing the blackmail bribery game anymore. Quebec gets a better deal than any other province in Canada, and they're constantly whining and demanding more money, and we give it to them, and it doesn't seem to make them any happier. Again, what if there was a party leader who said, no, I'm not doing that anymore? I mean, it would be useful to see that play out, see how that would work. I think it would have an enormous appeal in Canada, but nope, they're all scared. They're all cowards. Gerson continues, or was Trudeau correct when he said on the campaign trail, Canadians are beginning to know what those of us who watched him in the House have known for a long time about Erin O'Toole. He'll say anything to try and get elected. The race for the Prime Minister hangs between Trudeau and O'Toole. While I like Jagmeet Singh, honestly, who doesn't? Well, I don't. I'm not going to spend much time on him in this final summary. On the block, I have nothing to add. Quebec is not my circus. Either of these parties may hold the balance of power on Tuesday. Annamie Paul has demonstrated herself to be more impressive than the party that is proving itself to be a national punchline by working to undermine her. Annamie Paul is an NGO spiff. She's never worked in the private sector in her life. No one had ever heard of her before she decided to run for the leadership of the Green Party. But since she's a Black woman in Canada, only nice things are going to be said about her. But despite she shaves her head. What kind of woman shaves her head? It makes you look crazy, like Britney Spears. But I will say that when someone like Jen Gerson, who is pretty much solidly, received wisdom in Canada, when she writes a piece at the end of the election just demonstrating how fed up she is with all the political parties and all the political leaders, it gives you an indication of how desperately cynical my country has become. And one of the few things that I enjoy about Canadian elections, some of the candidates that I can't stand end up losing. And one of those is a woman called Maryam Montsev. who was a cabinet minister. This is a woman who claimed to have been, her calling card was that she was from Afghanistan. And then it turns out she's not from Afghanistan. She was born in Iran. And how she managed to end up in Canada is a really interesting question that hasn't been answered. In, I think it was 2004, she sold up her property, everything she owned in Peterborough, and was going to move to a job in Afghanistan. And jobs in Afghanistan? What kind of jobs are available in Afghanistan? The whole thing smacks of deep state. But she managed to lose. So that was good. I enjoyed that. Let's see. Carolyn Orr, a very angry piece at the National Observer. Shocking anti-vaccine protest that plagues Canada's election spawned resurgent far-right movement. Yes, the far right is always resurging in Canada, and then nothing happens because there's no such thing as a far right in Canada. There's not even a right in Canada. There's various shades of left. She writes, while vaccines and mask policies are viewed favorably by most Canadians, the vocal minority who oppose them are a growing threat, not only to public health, but to public safety and even democracy itself. Okay. So there's people in Canada who are opposed to mandatory vaccines. Shouldn't they be represented in our democracy? No, apparently not. In recent weeks, anti-vaccine protests have drawn angry, unruly crowds outside hospitals and other healthcare facilities across Canada, blocking patients and employees trying to access the buildings, and at least one instance forcing cancer patients to get out of cars and walk through the unmasked mob. Protesters have reportedly verbally and physically assaulted healthcare workers. Sure they have. While others have used social media to issue threats of violence against doctors and nurses. Last month, anti-vaccine protesters showed up at the home of an Ontario education minister, and upon learning that he wasn't there, decided to harass his neighbors instead. On the campaign trail, Trudeau has been tracked by angry crowds of anti-vaxxers shouting profanities and making Nazi references. Less than 2 weeks after security concerns forced him to cancel a rally in Ontario, Trudeau was hit with gravel thrown by an anti-vaccine protester at one of his campaign events. With Election Day near, Canada's anti-vaccine movement is more active and more angry than ever. And some extremism experts can never get enough of them, are worried about what will happen when the protesters no longer have an election to direct their outrage towards. They're going to be trouble for some time. Kurt Phillips, board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network and founder of Anti-Racist Canada, told the National Observer, the rage that exists in this movement, I don't know where that goes after the election. It could explode. And none of these stories that quote anyone working with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, for some reason they don't mention that there seems to be one funder of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which is the federal government of Canada. In other words, AstroTurf. Nonetheless, possibly the first time ever in Canada, and certainly the first time in recent history, vaccination has taken the center stage as a major campaign issue in the federal election. Now, I will point out that the Pfizer and these other jabs are not vaccinations as traditionally understood. They are experimental mRNA technology, which is one of the reasons why some people are afraid of them. But back to the angry woman. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the pandemic when he announced the election in August, saying voters deserve to have a say in who leads the country during its recovery from COVID-19. While mask requirements, vaccine mandates, and other restrictions are already in place, Trudeau promised to pursue an aggressive strategy to combat COVID if the Liberal government remains in power, and criticized his opponent, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, for opposing vaccine mandates. In August, Trudeau pledged $1 billion to help provinces create their own vaccine passport systems, a move that has widespread public support. Similar to in the U.S., the anti-vaccine movement in Canada is driven by a multitude of factors, including distrust of the government and other institutions, animosity towards experts and authorities, cultural grievances, rejection of mainstream science, and the creeping influence of extremism in mainstream discourse on the right. Oh, I don't know. Might be something else at work here. that the science is constantly changing, apparently, but whatever point the science has reached, that's written in stone, and you're not allowed to criticize that until they move on to something else, which is, again, the science, which is written in stone. Much of the anger and opposition to vaccination is propelled by the misinformation and conspiracy theories alleging that vaccines are unsafe, harmful, or part of some government plot at establishing a biometric surveillance system or other form of government control. The anti-vaccine movement has close ties to extremist groups, Christian nationalists, boo, QAnon conspiracy theorists, run-of-the-mill grifters and scam artists, and other right-wing causes like the Yellow Vest movement, which now airs its grievances under the banner of anti-vaccine activism. Every single prominent yellow vester that I'm aware of is now an anti-vaxxer, Phillips said. Oh, yes, the yellow vest, the very powerful, huge yellow vest movement in Canada. This is the country that I live in, where there's no extremists to speak of, and they continually have to be invented. Oh, yes, apparently there's enormous support for the 3%ers. You know that group you've never heard of? Apparently, that is a very serious threat to Canada. Once again, that group you've never heard of. Catherine Orr Bueno, PhD, mother, wife, feminist, behavioral scientist, postdoc at UMD, studying mis/disinformation. Yes, whatever the elite disagrees with is mis or disinformation, because once again, there's no dissent allowed in my country. Hello to Professor Paul. Haven't seen you for a while. Chogokin666 says, Coachalango, trade unions are turning against their comprador union leaders and goons. Chogokin666 says, Jonathan Paul, when are you coming back? Metal Mike says, KMG announced his pronouns. And reminded us that he's live streaming for the traditional lands of the Cree tribe, Big Canoe. Jonathan Pohl says, I have been in the U.S. for 3 weeks. I am working in New Mexico. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Professor. Did Kevin set his videos for kids? I can't do the mini player anymore. No, I did not. Quachalango says, R.I.P. Angelo Codavia. I second that. I had the opportunity to speak with him years ago when I was in talk radio, and he struck me as one of the most intelligent men that I have ever met. Metal Mike says, when the CBC called it for Trudeau, Rosemary, yeah, okay, I'm not going to repeat that. Rosemary Barton, yes. She gets to be a debate moderator when she's so clearly in the tank for Trudeau. After Trudeau became prime minister, a whole bunch of journalists put up on, their Twitter accounts pictures of them smiling, giggling with mirth, with delight, with sexual energy, next to Trudeau. What's up with all the gens, says Oscar Toe. That's a good question. Hello to Kyle Free. Harper did the same thing, reaching out. Jason Kenney wore a turban for Harper every second day. They still hated him. It didn't work. Yes, in the 2011 election, where the Conservatives won a majority, they won 31% of the minority vote. And they're clapping themselves on the back about this. So that's to say you were losing more than 2-1. And you think this is a good result? Meanwhile, in that election, Harper got 55% of the Protestant vote. So, there's a lesson to be learned there, which is perhaps you should graze where the grass is. This is from Rose LeMay at the Hill Times. Don't rush to raise the flag just yet. Yes, indeed. All of the Canadian flags on federal properties in my country have been at half-mast until since the end of May. And apparently this could last forever because some graves were found. Well, actually, they knew they were graves, but no one had paid any attention. And apparently something bad happened 100 years ago. And I'm looking at a fountain here where there's a bunch of stuffed animals and little shoes. It's been 4 months since the news broke of 215 unmarked graves from an unpronounceable name, actually Kamloops. at the former site of the Kamloops Residential School in British Columbia. We don't know that they're unmarked graves. We don't know this because there's been no excavation done, and there isn't going to be any excavation because apparently that would be disrespectful. Apparently, we have broken ground. That's all we know. But the media went completely nuts. At least 751 unmarked graves were found by Cowasness in the Qu'Appelle Valley the following month in Saskatchewan, and 160 more on Cooper Island in British Columbia, then another 182 at Cranbrook in British Columbia and in Brandon, Manitoba, and more. Last week, an unpronounceable First Nation announced it will start a search for unmarked graves at the Nanaimo Indian Hospital. This is the next chapter of the story, Indian hospitals. We've heard about the residential schools, and now we'll start to hear about the needless deaths and unmarked graves at the so-called hospitals. Class action lawsuits have started, and the summary may be that the stories of survivors of these hospitals may be shocking. It's part of Canada's history, and it will be told. Canadian flags have been flying at half-mast since the news of the unmarked graves at Kamloops. In the first few weeks, I was devastated every time I drove by a flag at half-mast and routinely had to look away. I was brought to tears when driving by a church with its steps covered in little girls' shoes. Every image was a reminder of the long-standing human rights violations my community has endured. And yet, we are still here. Yes, they are still there. And again, it's a funny kind of genocide that you're talking about when the population of Indians in Canada continues to increase, both in absolute numbers as a percent and as a percentage of the population. None of these stories, none of them, ever talk about what the death rates were for everyone in Canada, say 100 years ago. I mean, it's pretty shocking when you find out how many people died as children in Canada at that time, not just Indians, but all Canadians. But no, they never get into the context of this. Okay, that's enough Canada. This is from Peter Nicholas at The Atlantic. Why Biden bet it all on mandates. The president's decision could cost Democrats in 2022 and 2024. He doesn't care. Oh, so yes. So is Peter Nichols, he's looking into the mind of pudding brain Joe Biden, really? When Biden rolled out his plan requiring vaccinations on a mass scale, he sounded like a gambler at the point of desperation. Biden's presidency and much of his legacy hinges on defeating the prolonged pandemic. During a dismal summer of rising infections and deaths due to vaccine holdouts and the Delta variant, the pandemic seemed to have defeated them. Under the new rules, Biden hopes to pressure about 80 million more Americans to get their shots. It's a political risk that opens him up to Republican attacks that he's intruding on people's freedoms ahead of midterm elections that could easily strip the Democrats of their congressional majority. Biden gets this. He's all in, win or lose. There are going to be people who don't believe in the mandates and don't believe they should be told what to do. Senator Rick Scott of Florida, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, told me, encapsulating an argument that his party plans to make ahead of the midterms. We're supposed to live in a country where you're not being dictated everything. While Scott's sentiment may resonate with hardline Republicans, he appears to be misreading the larger public mood. As frustration with the pandemic mounts, Republican leaders look to be on the wrong side of an effort to expand vaccinations through a more forceful show of executive power. Under Biden's plan, businesses with more than 100 employees will face fines unless they require their workers to be vaccinated or get weekly COVID-19 tests. Not only do most people favor vaccine mandates, but even a good chunk of Republican voters who've gotten their shots are inclined to blame the unvaccinated for the pandemic's persistence. Forcing people to get the shots wasn't Biden's first choice. Inside the White House, the preference was that Americans do this on their own. But with so many people still unvaccinated, even though the shots were readily available, Biden was losing patience. Yes, the President of the United States has lost patience with the American people, and they will have to suffer. Months ago, because of the potential political blowback, no one wanted to resort to mandates, a senior Biden administration official told me, speaking on the condition of anonymity to talk more freely. But then it became clear that we didn't have any other choice because essentially we had pulled out all the stops. We tried trusted messengers to promote the vaccines. We made it very convenient. It wasn't enough. Yes, and if you want to get people to do something that is supposedly good for them, bullying them and threatening them suggests weakness, that the facts are not on your side. Biden's bet, while risky, grows more solid by the day. Republicans are making a counter-argument that they believe their base wants to hear, which would be fine if their base were sufficient to wrest control of Congress from the Democrats. Biden is trying to appeal to a wider audience. Two of the most prized voting blocs in an election, suburban and independent voters, favor Biden's vaccine mandate plan by solid margins. They don't see the vaccine requirement as government overreach. For them, it's a step toward re-entering a world that they remember from 2 years ago. Yes, when the American people are told that everyone needs to get vaccinated because the vaccines aren't working, again, this is not a powerful argument. When you hear about polls, say regarding, mandatory vaccinations, what the polls don't tell you is how strongly people feel about this. Sure, polls tell you that the majority of Americans or Canadians, whoever, are in favor of vaccine mandates, but the people who are in favor of it, how strongly are they in favor of it, as opposed to those people who are not in favor of it? Because the people who are not in favor of it, they feel very strongly about this indeed. That's one of the things that polling has done to polling and focus groups, is that you always get the answer that you want. You just have to ask the question in the right way. This is from Jesse O'Neill at the New York Post. Hundreds of anti-vaxxers flooded Times Square for a polarizing protest Saturday. The event included a pole dancer and a person who held a sign comparing the inoculation effort to the Nazis' mass murder of Jews. How did the Nazis do it? They said the Jews were diseased. One woman's sign read, social media images show. The woman held in her other hand a picture of a swastika made out of syringes with the phrase, "What happened to never again," according to the images. American flags and less offensive signage with slogans such as "Freedom over Fear" and "Wake Up New York" were also on display in the crossroads of the world, pictures showed. Few in the crowd wore masks, as many demanded an end to the city's vaccine passport mandate. The protest came as more than 2/3 of all New York City residents have received at least one shot of the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, again, if 1/3 of New Yorkers have not been vaccinated after all of the bullying and all of the threats and, oh, it's free and it's easy and you can get it at Walgreens or whatever, it seems likely to me that at least 20% of Americans are not going to get vaccinated. And let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say. And then everything happens at once. This is a very nervous country, he begins, and for good reason. The collective sense of reality has commenced a momentous shift. The compass is spinning wildly, things are shaking loose in the national brain pan, the gaslight has lost its sheen, and the once solid narrative is turning to vapor, starting with the unspooling riddles of COVID-19. The numbers don't add up, starting with the fact that when you combine the official registered COVID cases, people with acquired immunity, with the people who already had some kind of immunity from previous lifelong coronavirus encounters, with the number of people vaccinated, you have a population supposedly way beyond herd immunity. Who's getting sick now? Mostly people who are all vaxxed up. Contrary to the behavior and statements of public health officials and politicians, the news is out that the spike proteins produced by the vax's mRNA genetic programming are toxic agents that create disorder in the major organs and blood vessels. The news is also out, despite strenuous suppression, that early treatment of COVID-19 with a kit of cheap drugs defeats the disease. People must conclude that there is a malevolent purpose behind the suppression of early treatment. They may also conclude that the vaxes are poison. Mandating the vaxes was an easily predicted tactical blunder. Did Joe Biden and company not realize that threatening the livelihoods of 100 million people might generate a whole lot of anger and resentment, especially since those people have good reasons to believe the vax is harmful to them? Last week, an FDA advisory panel ruled against distributing mRNA booster shots among the general population over age 16, with exceptions for the vaguely defined high-risk individuals over 65. In spite of that, COVID czar Dr. Anthony Fauci keeps pushing for boosters. On Sunday, he told NBC's Jake Tapper, We're waiting for data on natural immunity. We know that if you have natural immunity and also get the shot, immunity drastically increases. Oh, really? Even though it's known for sure, i.e. established in science, that natural immunity is way more potent, comprehensive, and permanent than anything the vaccine pretends to offer, while it is becoming clear that the vaccine disables people's immune system, hence the impressive number of vaxxed getting sick. Is Dr. Fauci desperate or just plain crazy? The question may be moot because it looks like he's out of running room on his whole crusade, COVID-19 vaxxes, authoritative bullshit, and all. The story has fallen apart. It looks an awful like the government is trying to harm people health-wise while it destroys jobs and small business and ruins households financially, and that counter story is spreading faster now than COVID-19. It's fair to ask whether all that has destroyed the legitimacy of the people in charge, but that is only one of several issues converging to detonate the people's faith in their own government. It appears that the first results of the Arizona 2020 election will first come out this week. Word is that the results are not just eye-opening, but devastating. They will show appalling mischief in the balloting. Bad optics a little bit when Joe Biden's government already has its heel on the neck of 100 million people to get a dangerous vax or lose their jobs and income. The crisis on the US-Mexican border has suddenly gotten so bad that even the mainstream media had to report on it. The shanty town of Haitians and other foreign nationals moiling under the freeway bridge at Del Rio, Texas, grows by thousands each day to around 15,000 as of Sunday. Joe Biden owns the open border and everybody knows it, and the actual citizens of the USA are getting alarmed and sore about it. On Sunday night, the White House announced plans to fly at least 10,000 of the Haitians to Haiti, despite the fact that most of them had been living in Brazil, Chile, and other nations before entering the USA. Haiti is, of course, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and only recently suffered a massive earthquake, not to mention the assassination in July of its president. Does this airlift sound like a plan? Maybe check the no box on that. U.S. citizens might have also registered that Joe Biden unloaded 37,000 Afghanis in 5 states since we bailed on that country August 31st and plans to bring in almost 100,000 by the end of 2022. All this at a time when millions of Americans have lost their businesses, lost their jobs, and are under threat of losing more jobs for not getting vaxxed. Think this is enough to cause a national attitude adjustment? China's financial system has tipped into a liquidity crisis with the insolvency of its colossal Evergrande real estate Ponzi. As I write, U.S. equity markets are down over 1% at the Monday open. Several European markets are down over 2% at their close. Isn't this a great time for a global financial crisis? Maybe you're saying no, not so much. That'd probably be a good call. Events, you see, are closing in on the fraught, mendacious fakery that permeates the world, and the USA especially, in this time of the proposed Great Reset. This is the week that will be the week that was. Try to keep your head together while other heads are exploding around you and see what kind of country we are on Friday. Maybe not quite the same place. And, oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I said I was finished with Canada, but there's another crisis here, and it's Reddit. Yep. This is from Madeline Cummings at CBC. Misinformation on Reddit has become unmanageable, Alberta moderators say. Would this be a story anywhere else in the world? People are saying weird things on Reddit. Isn't Reddit where the kids go to say weird things? Misinformation flooding some of Alberta's biggest online communities has become a major problem during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to 3 volunteer Reddit moderators in Edmonton. In separate interviews with CBC News, the moderator said the number of posts pushing misinformation and conspiracy theories about COVID-19 has surged in their communities on Reddit, a huge social media and news aggregator site that hosts thousands of discussion forums or communities known as subreddits for millions of users. The moderators say the vast majority of these posts come from users who have never participated in their online communities before. Thousands of Albertans rely on their local Reddit communities, but volunteer moderators say keeping these places free of pandemic-related misinformation and disinformation, misinformation that is intentionally spread, has become increasingly difficult and time-consuming. Posts questioning the safety of vaccines and masks, linking vaccines with 5G networks, comparing COVID-19 to the flu, and promoting unproven treatments like the eye drug have become common, the moderator said. Our moderation queue went from probably one or two of those a week to dozens to hundreds every day, and it is unsustainable. We cannot keep up with that, said a 32-year-old Edmonton man who was a moderator for r/Alberta, a community or subreddit with more than 138,000 subscribers. CBC is not naming the man because he has received personalized threats and harassment from people whose posts he has removed in the past, and he fears he could be targeted again. A fellow Alberta moderator, who was an Edmonton student in his 20s, said death threats have become common in the team's inbox, and the authors of misinformation posts often urge moderators to kill themselves. Troy Pavlek, a moderator for Edmonton, a subreddit with more than 136,000 subscribers, said moderators handle between 50 to 100 misinformation posts per day. He said users opposed to masks and vaccines pose as healthcare workers and spread messages like, have you heard that vaccines can kill you? The acceleration, just like our case counts, has gone exponential, Pavlek said. Last month, moderators of Alberta and dozens of other subreddits around the world protested rampant COVID-19 misinformation on Reddit and asked the American company to take responsibility for it. Following the online protest, the company banned one subreddit, quarantined 54 others, and added a reporting feature for moderators to flag community interference. A quarantine means the page won't show up in search results, and when users try to access it directly, they'll be shown a warning message. A Reddit spokesperson told CBC News that the company takes the issue extremely seriously and has a goal of decreasing the burden placed on moderators. Such suffering, such terrible, terrible suffering. The spokesperson said the company has changed how it detects users who evade bans by creating new accounts, and said moderators can turn to a pool of experienced peers for help when it comes to unexpected traffic surges. Moderators say the recent changes are inadequate because the flow of misinformation has not slowed down. Yes, apparently Albertans, some people in Alberta just keep saying the wrong things on social media, and this is a crisis somehow. The very spread of these ideas in multiple spaces, multiple times, are undoubtedly doing real harms to society, increasing the spread of COVID-19 and almost certainly leading to death, said Rebecca Tromble, director of the Institute for Data, Democracy, and Politics at the George Washington University. Tromble said companies could choose to restructure their platforms to be much smaller, but she didn't think they would do that because where they achieve profit is through the very large scalable model. She also talked about the possibility of governments breaking up tech companies through regulations. She said the European Union has two large pieces of proposed legislation, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, that when they go into effect are going to have clear spillover effects around the world. The Edmonton moderators said their teams have been struggling with burnout for months. Some moderators have left their positions, and recruiting new ones can be difficult. Despite being on the receiving end of so much invective, the volunteers said they cannot bring themselves to walk away because that would mean allowing more misinformation to spread in communities they care about. If I were to stop doing what I'm doing, then the misinformation just gets worse. And once we made it a home for misinformation, once we said this is okay, this is not something we're going to stop, then it sweeps in more and more. And this community, which has been a joy for me in the past, will never be a joy for anyone ever again, Pavlek said. Oh, the pain, the pain. Yeah, life is tough all over. Let's go to the chat here. Chassis is such a fun word to pronounce, says Brendan Smith. Steve, the selfless sacrifice of our Reddit guardians. Head McNeck says, I don't want to think about it right now. Not trusting the plan is a hard lesson to learn, says Brandon Smith. Don Willis says, one of my clients is in the custom service truck business. They can't get chassis. Chokin666, I hear many Reddit threads from regretful ex-vax enthusiasts. Palcasso88 says, Ramsey Paul had some interesting tweets about supply chain problems, e.g. tractor trailers sitting idle due to lack of parts. Don Willis says Project Veritas O'Keefe has released some troubling vax nurse interviews. When the Redditor began to hate, says No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA. Okay. Let's see. So an hour-long interview on Greg Hunter's site via Rumble with an analyst called Karen Kingston. What she had to say about the vaccine was very disturbing. Okay, let's get back to it here. And see if there's anything new at Alex Berenson's Substack, Unreported Truths. He writes, it looks more and more as if unless you are a young woman on birth control, the Johnson & Johnson shot is far superior. It has a better side effect profile and doesn't collapse even after a single shot. Good luck at getting Dr. Anthony Fauci, three-time winner of the Grammy Award for Best R&B Album, to admit this. And let's see. People have been asking me about my tweets. As you know, when Twitter made me go bye-bye, they made all my tweets unavailable because they didn't want anyone to see how right. I mean, what a public health menace I had been. Fortunately, I have an essentially complete archive. I want to put it up unedited, somewhere permanent and searchable. It's not a true substitute because it lacks the threads, I believe, but at least the original tweets will be available. But we shouldn't stop there. We need the equivalent of the US UCSF's Tobacco Archive, a single site that will host all crucial documents from the Fauci emails to the WHO's tweets to whatever is available in Chinese or English about RATG13 and BT4991. It needs to be organized in some reasonable way. It needs to be permanently funded, and it needs to be backed up and beyond censorship, because an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind future is far from impossible to imagine when it comes to the Roe and especially the vaccines. I think I can raise some money for this. Berenson writes, I think it should be a nonprofit and I shouldn't run it. Who's with me? And, okay, so there was a march, a pro-Trump march in Washington, D.C., and this is from Tommy Christopher at Mediaite. Early reports and videos emerging from the post-Capitol riot or Justice for J6 rally indicate that the event has drawn a few dozen attendees and many times that number of press and police. On Saturday afternoon, videos began trickling out on social media showing the early stages of the event, organized to show support for those imprisoned over the January 6th invasion of the Capitol, showing very high turnout by cops and the media. Spectrum News congressional reporter Taylor Populars posted some observations along with a clip noting several hundred press, hundreds of police, a few dozen rally attendees, a couple dozen counter-protesters, media flocking to individual people in circus-like fashion. Rally attendees tell me they're disappointed by turnout, but pleased with press attention. Well, Donald Trump told everyone to stay away because it's obviously, going to be feds all the way down. And let's take a look at lockdown skeptics, or dailyskeptic.org as it's known now. The cancer backlog scandal is so much worse than you think. At the start of the pandemic, I said that lockdown could end up killing more people than COVID. I wish I had been wrong, writes Alison Pearson in The Telegraph. More than 100,000 pupils off school in England last week amid COVID surge. Head teachers receiving death threats over COVID vaccines rollout in schools. Millions could work from home forever under new flexible working laws. Working from home could become the norm for millions of Brits after the pandemic, with new rules set to give employees the right to request home working from the first day on the job, reports The Sun. Doctors suffering wave of abuse over lack of face-to-face appointments. The head of the Royal College of GPs says the current situation, with just over half of appointments taking place in person, is about right. Biological and molecular evidence why children are effectively COVID immune and can be considered already vaccinated. COVID vaccines offer children no opportunity for benefit and only potential opportunities for harms, write Paul Alexander in Trial Site. Students craving mask mandates are typical of the new breed of safety obsessives created by lockdown. The enduring legacy of the pandemic may be the growth of a section of society whose desire to be insulated from all risk is best illustrated by their performative mask wearing, and this spells danger for everyone's freedoms, writes Frank Ferruti in Russia Today. Well, I've noticed since we moved to the vaccine passport mandate in my province of British Columbia on the 13th of this month, I've noted again an enormous number of people outside wearing masks. And I want to go up to every single one of them and ask them, do you have any idea how vast the atmosphere is? What are you afraid of? Although maybe they're not afraid of anything, you know? Again, it's performative. You see, I'm a good person because I'm wearing a mask, and you're not wearing a mask, so you are a bad person and should be ashamed. Leaked documents have revealed that 18 months before reports emerged of the first COVID cases, scientists linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology were planning to release coronaviruses into Chinese bat caves in order to inoculate them against diseases that could pass on to humans. Vaccine mandate could force holiday homes for disabled people to close. Extra 10,000 Brits likely to die of cancer due to drop in emergency referrals during lockdown, according to new study. The vaccine rollout was based on safetyism, not science. In a poll of experts taken by Nature earlier this year, only 6% it was unlikely or very unlikely that SARS-CoV-2 will become endemic. By contrast, 89% said this was likely or very likely. As Professor Francois Balloux has observed, eventually COVID will become endemic everywhere in the world. Claims about indefinite elimination are just empty slogans. This means the virus will continue to circulate for the foreseeable future, and most of us will catch it several times during our lives. In fact, it may become one that we first encounter in childhood, leading to immunity in the last years or decades. COVID, in other words, is here to stay. And unless more powerful vaccines are developed in the future, permanently suppressing transmission via vaccination is unlikely to work, let alone pass a cost-benefit test. As the Great Barrington Declaration authors have argued, vaccines are best seen as a means of achieving focused protection against COVID. By vaccinating the elderly and clinically vulnerable, we have turned what, for many of those people, could have been a life-threatening illness into something less harmful. However, since the start of the vaccine rollout, numerous people, including some world leaders, have taken a rather different view of the vaccines. For these individuals, the vaccines are a way of crushing the curve and thereby ensuring that nobody ever has to get COVID. But this view is based more on safetyism than on science, and ironically, it's causing real harm. How so? First, safetyism has led to the belief that everyone needs to get vaccinated regardless of age. This is why the government is proceeding with the vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds against the better judgment of its own expert panel. Yet, as I and others have argued, a far better course of action would be donating those vaccines to poor countries. Second, safetyism has led to the belief that everyone needs to get vaccinated even if they've already been infected. Yet evidence suggests that people with natural immunity have better protection against infection than recipients of the Pfizer vaccine. As Professor Marty McCary notes in a recent article for the Washington Post, if we had asked Americans who were already protected by natural immunity to step aside in the vaccine line, tens of thousands of lives could have been saved. Third, safetyism has led to the belief that we need to roll out our booster shots because vaccine-induced immunity wanes rapidly. So far, however, this is only true of immunity against infection. Immunity against severe disease appears to hold up well. In a recent Lancet article, Philip Krauss and colleagues argue that there is not yet any need for boosters, which could cause adverse reactions if administered too soon or too frequently. They point out that vaccines will save the most lives if made available to people who are at appreciable risk of serious disease and have not yet received any vaccine. Fourth, safetyism has led to the belief that people should be strong-armed into getting vaccine by means of passports and mandates rather than persuaded. Although coercive measures may increase vaccine uptake, they risk undermining trust in government and the healthcare system. What's more, vaccine passports could have unintended consequences. If vulnerable people are led to believe wrongly that the vaccines have strong efficacy against infection, they might take more risks than they otherwise would. A vaccine rollout based on science, not safetyism, would have recognized that not everyone needs to be vaccinated. It would have assigned leftover vaccines that people actually need them, and would have eschewed coercive measures in favor of transparency about the risks and benefits. And that's a piece by Noel Carl at dailyskeptic.org. And here is a piece by Will Jones. He says, as an addendum to my piece yesterday on the evidence for variants driving COVID surges, a comparison between India and neighboring Bangladesh is illuminating. Once again, the curves below are the positive test rate, and they are superimposed on the graphs of variant proportions over time from the covariance website. India has had one large surge in 2021 so far, occurring in spring and associated with the Delta variant, which was first identified there. It has had no summer surge and no variant since. Bangladesh, on the other hand, has had two peaks in 2021, a spring peak associated with the Beta variant and a summer one associated with the Delta variant. Oh yes, Bob Woodward has a new book out, as you probably know, full of whoppers. I remember the time when Bob Woodward was at the deathbed of William Casey, the former head of the CIA, and Casey whispered to Bob Woodward something that he'd never told anyone else in the world, because that's just the effect that Bob Woodward has on people. They just can't control themselves. This is a review by Eric Rauchway in the Washington Post of the book by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa. Donald Trump's refusal to admit defeat in his re-election bid put American democracy, imperfect as it already was, in peril, and it remains there. The Washington Post, Bob Woodward, and Robert Costa show in their new book. Through a series of appalling examples in peril, the authors illustrate key aspects of Trump's threat to democracy, his unwillingness to accept legitimate dissent. Oh, I see. Trump is showing an unwillingness to accept legitimate dissent. We're talking about the enemies of Trump made it clear right from the beginning when he was elected in 2016 that he was not their president, that he was an illegitimate president, that he had stolen the election with Russian help. And these same people have the gall to accuse Trump of doing what they did for 4 years. But the danger Trump posed during the waning months of his presidency is only half the story of peril. Even if you already know the outlines of the details, many of which have already found their way into the press, deepen one's sense of how serious, even global, that danger was and how thoroughly Republicans enabled it. The other half of the book is an account of Joe Biden's campaign and early presidency, and as the authors shift between narratives, the reader must reckon with wildly differing realities. In one, Trump is the center of gravity. Everyone works toward him. Nothing matters except insofar as it fulfills his psychological needs. In the other, Biden is an ambitious politician leading a team of dedicated public servants trying to mitigate the coronavirus pandemic and its economic effects, endeavoring by sheer competence and energy to move the nation beyond Trumpism. I don't know who Eric Rauchway is, but I can't imagine writing paragraphs like this without turning, red with embarrassment. Oh yes, pudding brain Biden is just a model. He's just the very model of competency, and the people who work for him are the bestest people in the whole world. Let's go back to Joseph Tainter and his book, The Collapse of Complex Societies, Cambridge University Press, 1988. And we're talking about theories as to why societies collapse. An alternative resource depletion argument has been offered by Ekholm, who ascribes collapse to a loss of trade networks, external resources, and imported goods. An economic system becomes fragile when it comes to depend on external exchange over which it has little control. Since civilizations are always dependent on access to foreign markets, they are intrinsically vulnerable in this regard. Ekholm accounts in this manner for the collapses of the Third Dynasty of Ur and of the Mycenaean civilization, for regional instability in the Near East and the Eastern Mediterranean circa 2300 to 2200 BC, and for recent political upheavals in Madagascar. Similarly, Robert Briffaut in 1938 predicted the demise of the British Empire for reasons of unfavorable trade. Hodges and Whitehouse, in their critique of the Perrin Thesis, 1983, ascribed the post-Carolinian Dark Age to disruption of trade between Europe and the Near East following the economic collapse of the Abbasids. Cipolla argues that the economic decline of Italy in recent centuries has resulted from unsuccessful competition in foreign trade. Resource depletion arguments are perennial favorites in collapse studies. They have been prevalent for some time in Mesoamerican and Southwestern studies, but have also begun to gain prominence in Eastern North America, Europe, and the Near East. The possibility of resource depletion is, of course, a major concern to contemporary forecasters. The spectacular collapse of Mayan civilization in the southern lowlands has frequently led scholars to focus on resource depletion. C.W. Cook proposed in 1931 that collapse here was caused by soil erosion and land scarcity, encroachment of grasses, silting of lakes with consequent destruction of water transportation, a decline of water supply in dry years, and an increase in mosquito populations, along with increase or introduction of malaria. 30 years later, Sanders conducted an extensive study of lowland ecology and reached nearly the same conclusions. He argued that swidden agriculture in this region leads to soil nutrient depletion, weed competition, and savanna formation. In later writings, Sanders continues to favor an environmental deterioration argument, but supplements it by suggesting that political competition between Mayan centers favoring resource intensification was also a factor. Haas argues similarly that the Mayan collapse was due to weakening of the power base of subsistence resources and trade goods by environmental deterioration and external events. Rathje and Scherer both indict a loss of trade in the Mayan collapse. Such ideas have been applied elsewhere in Mesoamerica. S. Cook argued that soil exhaustion was responsible for both the Olmec and Highland collapses. Weaver sees the destruction of Tula as largely due to a climatic change, which caused the desiccation of north-centered Mexico, forcing peripheral northern populations to push south and overthrow the city. Sanders et al. At Hirth and Sweezy suggest that the collapse of Teotihuacan was due to loss of control over vital trade networks. Peru. Mosley indicts tectonic shift in the agricultural collapse of Chimu post-1000 AD. Due to tectonic underthrust, the Pacific watershed tends to tilt and rise, causing rivers to downcut and leading to lower groundwater levels and less runoff. The entire Chimu hydrological regime constricted, with consequences for surface vegetation. Canal intakes had to be repositioned upstream, which was less efficient. As water tables dropped in the Chimu case, farmers concentrated more on sunken gardens. But both sunken gardens and canals contracted through time back toward the river and downslope toward the sea. Mosley does not single out tectonic movement as the sole source of collapse. He suggests that it provides the background conditions that make intelligible such things as revolt, conquest, soil depletion, and so forth. He does, however, implicate uplift in agricultural collapses elsewhere, such as the Near East, the Mayan lowlands, and the Mesoamerican Cordillera, the American Southwest. Climatic change is the most common explanation for the collapse of horticultural settlements and of social complexity in various areas of the Southwest. Agricultural mismanagement is occasionally added to the picture. The most frequent resource depletion arguments postulate such things as drought, erosion, shifts in rainfall seasonality, lower temperatures, overhunting of game, and depletion or increasing alkalinity of cultivable soils. Throughout the Southwest uplands, drought and arroyo cutting have long been the dominant explanations of regional abandonment. Climatic explanations are common in the Hohokam region of southern Arizona, but here the results of agricultural malpractice are often added, such as waterlogging and or salt buildup in the soils. Adams notes there are signs of malnutrition in some Hohokam skeletons and links these signs to agricultural problems. Weaver has developed the most complete argument along these lines. He suggests that after 1275 AD, drought and salt accumulation in tilled fields led to a decline of the complex Hohokam social, political, and ritual systems, especially in outlying areas. Then, circa 1325, a period of abnormally high moisture with heavy spring runoff damaged or destroyed many canal heads and brush dams. This led to continued declines in crop yield, lower population, and increased dependence on wild foods. The economic stress led to social-political collapse. When normal climatic conditions returned after circa 1475, a variety of factors prevented the reemergence of Hohokam complexity. Eastern North America. Over the last 2 decades or more, climatic explanations have gained currency in Midwestern archaeology. This is due largely to the work of James B. Griffin. The collapse of northern Hopewell was ascribed by Griffin to a slightly cooler climatic phase in the upper Mississippi Valley. He has made similar assertions regarding the shift from the agricultural Mississippian Old Village tradition to the foraging Oneida pattern, which occurred circa 1200 to 1400 AD. Vickery supports the argument, as in large part do Barris, Bryson, and Kutzbach. See also Bryson. Melvin Fowler has developed a contrasting interpretation for the collapse of the Mississippian center of Cahokia, arguing for exhaustion of local resources, timber, game, fertile soil, and the rise of competitive political centers. Egypt. Karl Butzer has argued in a number of studies that the collapse of the Old Kingdom and other political catastrophes of Egyptian history can be traced at least in part to variations in Nile flood levels and thus to precipitation patterns in the interior of Africa. High Nile floods are damaging in that they favor soil crop parasites, destroy dikes, ditches, settlements, food stores, and livestock, and delay harvesting into the dry season. Low floods also reduce yields. Butzer cites Nile failure as a definitive factor in the end of the New Kingdom, 1570 to 1070 BC, and as a likely factor in the Old Kingdom disintegration between 2760 and 2025 BC. This was the most prominent element in the failure of the Second Dynasty, 2970 to 2760 BC, and of the Middle Kingdom, 2035 to 1668 BC. Butzer's argument is by no means a simple climatic one. He notes that circa 1720 BC, Egyptian unity was threatened by the establishment of petty principalities in the Delta, well before the Hyksos invasion of 1668 BC. This in turn followed a period from 1840 to 1770 BC in which 1/3 of Nile floods were destructive enough to ruin the entire irrigation system. He also suggests that in the Old Kingdom collapse, political weakness preceded any Nile-related disasters, but these in turn may have triggered social unrest. Butzer thus sees Nile fluctuations as a contributory rather than a causal agent acting in concert with political weakness, poor leadership, overtaxation, and a top-heavy social pyramid to bring about episodes of disintegration. Butzer's views are reinforced by O'Connor, who believes the Old Kingdom collapsed from consistently lower Nile inundations and consequent famines. Barbara Bell's thesis is more encompassing. She argues that the widespread Eastern Mediterranean, Near Eastern regional dark ages of circa 2200 to 2000 and 1200 to 900 BC can both be accounted for by widespread droughts, each lasting several decades. In the Old Kingdom case, Bell argues the failure of the Egyptian king to maintain proper flood levels through ritual intervention led to reduced legitimacy of and confidence in the central government at a time when the power of regional nobles was increasing. And I'll have more from Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. So, apparently it's the award season. The Emmys were over the weekend. Do people still watch these things? You know, one of the reasons why people watched award shows in the past was the lack of ubiquity of actors and actresses. That, you know, you could see them in the movies, or you could see them on TV, but you weren't exposed to them every single day, which is what you get from social media now. So why are people still supposed to be excited by awards shows? There's a hilarious piece at the Daily Beast by someone called Kevin Fallon called "The 2021 Emmys Were Thoroughly Modern, Mostly White. Boo! COVID unsafe disaster." And all awards show bits, that's the lesson. The Emmy winners did the show for them. They were all mostly great. There were surprises sprinkled throughout, the kind of fun that shocks TV critics watching alone on their couch with some rosé, and makes them stand up reflexively and start clapping about. Yeah, I think we're getting a pretty good idea of what kind of person Kevin Fallon is. That was me when Mayor of Easttown's Julianne Nicholson deservedly won, Olivia Colman's Queen Elizabeth reigned over Emma Corrin's Princess Diana, and Hacks creator, writer, director Lucia Aniello got her double win. Is, as the kids say, nature healing, or did Kate Winslet just win an acting award while reminding herself to breathe or gather? The speeches were great. The energy was ecstatic. The stars looked like $1 million and delivered Hollywood charisma and polish. We needed that. We needed them. And they were giving it. I cannot remember an award show in which the host did the proceedings such a disservice. Cedric the Entertainer actually did a Mike Pence fly on the head sketch in this, the month of September in the year of our Lord 2021. He brought Dr. Phil into the equation. Dr. Phil, into what was supposed to be the woke progressive, were pointing the way toward the more enlightened industry telecast, frankly, into any telecast. Dr. Phil on my TV screen to entertain the masses. Ted Lasso and The Crown won a whole lot of awards Sunday night, to the point that Twitter snarks wondered if anyone had watched anything else on TV. Mayor of Easttown was almost getting those scoffs too, except whoever voted for limited series noticed that I May Destroy You, which should have won every award, including ones it was not nominated for. Oh my God, this man is unbearable. The Queen's Gambit and Halston also exist. As a TV critic, I've wondered who exactly watched Halston. Now that it's won a prestigious acting award, I wonder more than ever who. We're post-COVID. We're in COVID. We've had a racial reckoning. No one will say what that means. We hate award shows. We tune into award shows. And no one can make up their minds how they feel about effing Ted Lasso. Yes, that show that you've never heard of, that we're all supposed to have opinion about. What I'm saying, Fallon continues, is that this year's Emmy Awards telecast was the best and worst argument for the ways in which Hollywood systems have and have not changed. This is a sentence that makes no sense because the situation we are in makes no sense. So how dare this award show not directly address that? But also, how could it? And how dare it not? With 3 question marks at the end of that sentence. First, let's talk about the show. The worst parts of every award show are the parts that the awards show plans. Never has it been laid more bare than it was Sunday night. Stop producing bits. E's red carpet coverage with arms race in cringe content in which Queer Eye star and now E host Caramel Brown was in nuclear competition with himself was an exercise in secondhand mortification. Then the opener, a musical number that would have been humiliating if you did it at your high school talent show, but somehow convinced the finest and most successful minds in Hollywood to willingly participate, opened the ceremony. I loved it. It was terrible. I hated that everyone involved was involved. Rita Wilson rapped. Here's the thing that no one seems to grasp. We're a captive audience. We're a desperate audience. Who is this guy writing for? That musical number, the late Biz Markey's Just a Friend, plastered a smile on me that only the ensuing abomination of a telecast could wipe off. No one knew what was going on. Catherine Hahn and Sterling K. Brown got into it immediately. Mandy Moore, Susan Kelechi Watson, Tracy Ellis Ross, Billy Porter, Annalee Ashford, they all started singing. What delightful chaos. Isn't that all any of us want in a celebrity audience participation bit? My favorite genre of award show bit is celebrities sheepishly yet enthusiastically participating in low commitment but possibly traumatizing audience participation sketches. And it felt right for an opener for a post-COVID, I am LOLing at the idea of anything being post-COVID at this point ceremony. It was both awkward and pure, trepidatious and jubilant. Everyone involved embodied everything we feel right now, both thrilled to go back into the world and move everything forward, but only when you can, and not when we're going to die doing it. They were all into it, but barely. In other words, our relationship to life right now. It was the prime example of the awfulness, and it goes on and on and on and on for hundreds of more words. This Kevin Fallon fellow seems to be easily excitable. Let's go back to the chat. Buddy says Gretchen Corbett, respectable, but well short of you know who. Red Sulfur says Dawn's on fire. And ARTE's YouTube channel has some interesting documentaries. Don Willis says, how could you be distracted so easily? Don Willis says, I have no interest in any Hollywood stars, parties, films, award shows, latest gossip, etc. We are fighting for the heart and soul of America. And Red Sulphur says, excessively diverse. But he says, I went on a Columbo viewing binge today. Great show. Yeah, I don't know. You know, the fellow who created it, it was two men who created it. Link, Levinson and Link, I think the names are. And they said that they based it on the detective in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. But it's essentially, it is the same show every episode. Annoying cop keeps talking to a killer, and eventually he's going to, reveal somehow that he actually committed the murder. They're all supposed to be so smart, but none of them are smart enough to realize that talking to the police is a bad idea. It's always a bad idea. Oh, Don Willis says Gretchen Corbett was hot on Rockford Files, but extremely hot on an episode of Columbo. Okay. Brandon Smith says Ricky Gervais was the only good awards show ever. Most people in my uncultured locale, says Buddy, would sooner consume fake maple syrup than the real stuff. What a joke from 30 Rock about the sacred tree of souls in Winnipeg. I have some Portuguese rosé waiting on the wings, says Red Sulphur. Head McNeck says, I'd like to write a short story about George Washington being reincarnated today and going on Twitter to organize a resistance to this craziness, but being shouted down as a Fed and failing. Byzantine's fave method of punishment, blinding. Matt Beck says, does anyone think that Steve Saylor has gone senile? I'm curious as to why you would say that. A new headline in Yahoo reads something like how white supremacists are celebrating the Byzantine Empire. That's from Buddy. Are they? Really now? I mean, how many, there's not very many of them to go around, right? Kevin, do Canadians have at least the best maple syrup? I don't know. I don't eat maple syrup. I don't eat pancakes. I can't say. Presumably. Materialist causes are only incidental to world history, says Matt Beck. If you're going to call the Confederacy the lost cause, this should be called the sick cause, says Texas Feral Hog. Quachalango says, and yet Peruvians and Mexicans are still around. Okay. And we are going to move on now. I'm going to end the show a little early today. This is absolutely hilarious. I want to end on a funny note. And this is one of those WTF stories. It is so funny, but it's also, what are the United States Special Forces doing in Guinea in the first place? This is from taskandpurpose.com. U.S. suspends military support to Guinea after Special Forces trained troops launch coup on their day off. The Defense Department suspended military assistance to the African country of Guinea after Guinean Special Operations Forces used their day off from being trained by American Green Berets to overthrow their government. No U.S. forces were involved in the September 5th coup in Guinea, Pentagon spokesman John Kirby told reporters Monday. We obviously share the U.S. government's condemnation of this coup in Guinea, Kirby said at a Pentagon news briefing. We're carefully reviewing the situation on the ground for any potential impacts on our military assistance. Until that review is complete, there's going to be no further training or support to the Guinean armed forces. A U.S. Special Forces team began teaching Guinean special operators in July about small unit tactics, tactical combat casualty care, language training, and the law of armed combat, said U.S. Africa Command spokeswoman Barda S. Azari. That training has been canceled due to the recent developments, she said. During the month and a half that the Special Forces trained the Guineans, U.S. troops met with Guinean Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, who is now the self-appointed ruler of Guinea after his forces deposed former leader Alpha Condé. As the commander of the Guinean Special Operations Forces, he approved activities between U.S. and Guinean Special Operations Forces. When asked how roughly 100 Guinean special operators could have left their base and made the 4-hour drive to the country's capital without the Special Forces team knowing anything about it, Azari explained, September 5th was considered a down day for both forces. Oh my God, they started a war when there wasn't supposed to be a war. It's too funny. It is possible that the Guineans left while the Special Forces team that was instructing them was asleep, Declan Walsh and Eric Schmidt of the New York Times reported. And although numerous U.S.-trained officers have seized power in their countries, most notably General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt, this is believed to be the first time one has done so in the middle of an American military course, the Times reported. Kirby did not answer directly when he was asked Monday whether the Green Berets were in fact sleeping while the Guinean troops who they were training headed off to storm the presidential palace. I think I'm just going to leave my answer the way I did, Kirby said. Once the Special Forces team realized what the Guineans were up to on their down day, they drove straight to the U.S. Embassy in the country's capital. A video posted on Twitter showed 2 vehicles with the Special Forces team driving through a crowd of ecstatic Guineans, one of whom repeatedly yells, "Liberté" and "Les Américains." One of the American soldiers can be seen in the video shaking hands with the adoring Guineans. He also appears to be taking a video of the scene with his cell phone. The person who tweeted the video asked if the U.S. troops were part of the coup. However, John Van Diver of Stars and Stripes first reported that the Green Berets were being escorted by Guinean security forces through the streets of the country's capital as they were en route to the American embassy. The military seizure of power is inconsistent with U.S. military training and education, Kirby said. Well, that's good to know. It's inconsistent. And let's go back to the chat here. And I recently saw a video on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, YouTube Entertainment Conspiracy Theory channel. They talked about the conspiracy of maple syrup being owned by a mafia, says Ashy Main Bravo. Red Sulfur says Cameroon is derivative of the Spanish camarón, which means shrimp. Oh, okay. Texas Feral Hog says Jordan Peterson has been getting it right lately. He's more spot on than any other IDW. KMG on the road routine and early exit, mixing it up. A la Hope USO show. Okay. Someone here at Red Sulfur says Guinea is Puerto Rican slang for banana. President of Guinea was anti-vax, by the way, says Chogoken 666. Red Sulfur says, I heard Mama JF is back. Texas Feral Hawk says, being shouted down as a Fed by Feds, but Washington is a Fed. Oh, okay. JF Garapi was, he drank a wine made from maple syrup. True Greenbird says, vaccines and related biological products advisory committee on YouTube starts at 8:09, or watch the whole thing. We're talking about it openly now. It's only a matter of time. Chogokin 666, log cabin better than Canadian tree juice. Metal Mike says, maple syrup is great to use in coffee instead of sugar. Okay. Ashley Main Bravo said Dave Collum was on Jim Kunstler's podcast recently and suggested the Davos global elite are planning a depopulation for a resource-scarce world through the Great Reset. Yes, we keep hearing about this Great Reset, and there has to be a plan there. Now, anyone who believes there's a plan is called a conspiracy theorist. But why do all of these world leaders, Boris Johnson, Biden, Justin Trudeau, they all use this phrase, the Great Reset? I mean, how is the world going to be reset, and how exactly is it going to be great? I mean, you have to understand why people are suspicious of this. They did Aunt Jemima bad, says Quachalango. Yes, I see that Uncle Ben's rice has been reintroduced, and there's no more Uncle Ben. And I thought, I never understood why that was supposed to be insulting. Who's this kindly old man, who brings us delicious rice? Well, why would anyone be upset about that? Ashley Main Bravo says Bill Gates just recently spoke at the UN General Assembly. Okay, what's coming up on the show later this week? On Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about a classic silent film from 1920, German Expressionism, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. On September the 30th, I'm going to be discussing a Danish classic from 1955, Or Det, which means to live, by Carl Theodor Dreyer. On October the 7th, I'm going to be discussing Season 1 of Babylon Berlin. On October the 14th, I'm going to be discussing David Mamet's 1991 procedural, a very strange film, Homicide. And October 21st, I'm going to be discussing Peter Brook's 1963, far superior original version of Lord of the Flies. On the book club this week, I'm going to be discussing a book about the Portuguese, Vasco da Gama. It's called Holy War by Nigel Cliff. On October the 1st, I'm going to be discussing a book about Islam by Roger Scruton, the late Roger Scruton, called The West and the Rest. October the 8th, I'm going to be discussing a short novel by Joseph de Maistre, The Executioner. On October the 15th, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. And October the 22nd, a book about murder songs, I Shot a Man in Reno by Graham Thompson. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you like the show, any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which would be very useful to me at this particular time, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.